Hey, JD here. Welcome to the Mead House. You know, over the past several years, we've brought you over 150 episodes of mead-making education, information, and entertainment. More than 100 guests have stopped by the Mead House, professional mead makers, medal-winning home mead makers, competition organizers, experts on yeast and honey, and brewers just like you and me have all visited to share their knowledge. Hey, the Mead House is produced for home mead makers and brewers looking for a bit of inspiration and information from the many guests and discussions we have here at the house. You can help support the Mead House by joining the Mead House Keyholder Club on Patreon. Just go to patreon.com and search for the Mead House. There's also a link in the show notes. For as little as $2 a month, you can become a keyholder. We've teamed up with some great companies to provide thank you gifts for your support. So get on over to Patreon, join the Mead House Keyholder Club, and get your own set of keys to the Mead House. You can listen to the Mead House podcast with your favorite player, and be sure to rate us 5 stars on iTunes or your favorite listening venue. The Mead House, mead-making entertainment you just don't want to miss. Hey, welcome to the Mead House, and thanks for listening to episode number 213. So I'm going to forgo any discussion about the chicken coop, cement mixer, and the barn fire. There's really no point in continuing this saga. But I will point out that we did finally find all the chickens who had escaped unscathed. Awakening to what sounded like a lot of cackling and clucking one night, I got the binoculars, and while scanning the horizon, I noticed a bunch of hens wobbling around in the parking lot of the strip club next door, while the rooster was seen keeled over on one side, waving a cocktail glass in one wing, apparently too drunk to stand up. And just before I put the binoculars down to fetch a bucket of feed to call them all home, I saw one patron come outside and toss a bunch of pretzels on the ground, causing mayhem amongst the fowl. So I just went back to bed. So anyway, hey, make sure and listen to the podcast on your favorite player. You can get the direct RSS feed right from the website, themeadhouse.com, as well as a number of listening locations like iTunes, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, the whole 9 yards, right up there on the front page of the website. They're all listed on the left-hand side there, themeadhouse.com. Hey, in this episode, episode segment 1 features a 5th generation mead-making enterprise. Let that sink in a minute. Okay, 5 generations. That takes us back to roughly the mid to late 1800s. All right, this didn't take place in some far-off country like Scandinavia. It actually took place right here in the United States, Maryland, in fact. Rachel Lippman is here to take us through the genealogy. And in segment 2, how much are you willing to spend on a batch of mead or homebrew? I know my 2 port mead projects cost me in excess of about $100 per 5-gallon batch. So how far are you willing to go? That's the question that Jeff wants to ask in segment 2. And of course, segment 3, the social club. This is where we try to answer questions from mead makers with no formal expertise other than what we've experienced in our own brew house. All that and more here at the Mead House. But first, hey, thanks to all the Mead House key holders who help keep the Mead House podcast free. You too, I'm getting pretty good at this, aren't I? You too can become a Mead House key holder and help support the show for as little as $2 a month. We've got some great thank you gifts. You know, it's a good thing we're not sitting across the table from one another, because I think I'd probably start cracking up looking at the faces of Ryan and Jeff as they kind of roll their eyeballs in the back of their head. Anyway, you too can become a key holder. Well, you know the deal. $2 a month. We've got some great thank you gifts to send out to you. Hey, check it out. Patreon.com. Search for the Mead House or just click on the link in the show notes. What are we drinking tonight? Double fisting it in Mead House fashion tonight. But I got 2 wildly different drinks tonight. First up, it's Tequila Tuesday here at the web. What are we calling this? Mead House what? South? Mead House Southwest? No, Mead House South. Something like that.
I think Southwest.
Southwest, yeah. All right. So, and I don't think I've talked about this one before. Come to think of it, I'm trying to think back. Geez, don't get old. I'm drinking this tequila. It's an extra añejo, organic 123 Diablito. extra añejo. Now this runs anywhere from $170 to $180 a bottle. Was turned on to me by a good friend who runs the liquor department over at my local pavilion store. And she really recommended this. And so I thought, well, okay. So I went over to my favorite discount liquor store and was able to find a bottle. Now, the thing about this stuff, it is really, really hard to find. So if you get a bottle of it, drink it slowly because you may not get another one. It's that small of a batch. Okay, this comes from a very small estate down in Mexico, 6,000 feet sea level. They harvest their own agave from their small estate, and the tequila is aged for 40 months in 114-liter American oak barrels, and these are virgin, charred American oak barrels. The aging gives it a very nice nose of white pepper, guava, vanilla, and then onto the palate with this kind of a chewy baked agave cream, almost a brulee type flavor, and some baking spices with vanilla, cinnamon, a little orange zest in there, and then the finish is a little on the bittersweet side, but it finishes very nicely with even hints of coffee beans and papaya. This is really good stuff. So this is, again, organic 123. It's an organic extra añejo tequila, Diablito extra añejo. And man, if you can find a bottle, grab it because it's done, it's distilled in such small little tiny batches. Their distribution is next to none. In the other hand, this is a project that I started, oh my gosh, I can't even, I'm going to say probably maybe 3 years ago now. This is one of the other port mead projects that I did. This one happens to be the plum and black currant project, and there's a hint of sweet cherry. And I used a blend of Syrah, Red Zinfandel, and Cabernet grape juices, along with 13 pounds of honey, some dried cherries, and, we talked about bananas, okay, in one of the episodes as a mouthfeel, to generate a little bit of mouthfeel. So these bananas, now it was only maybe not even a pound, I don't think. It doesn't take a lot. But these bananas, in fact, my wife was about ready to throw them away about 3 or 4 times, and I kept letting him get more black all the time. And she said, "You need to throw those away." I said, "Nope, not done yet." Well, when they were good and black and overly ripe, I mean, you got to pick them up with delicate hands, otherwise they just fall apart. But I managed to get them in the fermenter. These went in during fermentation, with a few ounces of sweet cherries, and then it rested on some dark sweet cherries for about a month, and then I added an entire bottle of brandy and a few ounces of French oak and let it sit on that. Now, I went one step further. After the French oak was done, I took 3 gallons out of that 5-gallon batch and put it into a small, fresh toasted medium toast oak barrel, a 3-gallon barrel. Now that's been sitting in there for, oh gosh, a good year and a half. And let me tell you something. I'm going to take another sip, Ryan. Wow. It's got a little bit of heat, a little more than the 2-gallon reserve that I have. Why? Because of the Angel share. Okay. It's lost. I don't know how. I need to measure it to see how much it has lost. A little bit of heat build up. But let me tell you something, man. I can taste the red Zinfandel, the sweet cherries. I get the black currant. I can even taste the plum. This thing is really outstanding. Tannin, the barrel char coming from the American oak barrel. Now, it's not going to produce any kind of vanillas or anything like that because there's just not I don't know that with all those flavors. I don't know the vanilla would actually show through coming out of the barrel like that. But what it does add after all that time is this barrel char and tannin that is just unbelievable. Really nice. So that's what I'm drinking tonight, guys. Jeff, what did you put in your cup?
With the old house under contract now, and my focus being more on the new home, I have discovered something about unpacking that I should have labeled bottles, because when we were getting packed up, I was bottling in a hurry and said, you know what? Okay, we'll make this simple. We'll put this this batch in bottles with corks, and this batch in little 12-ounce bottles with red caps and gold caps and things like that.
Yeah.
And now months later, I go, what was the gold cap again? So as part of my unpacking process, I am now in the process of opening up some of these bottles and seeing what is that gold cap anyway. So in one glass, I have this is a Chilean Malbec that I had made I want to say a year and a half ago. Nice and dry finish to it. It's got a lot of tannin to it, and has some of those spicy Malbec notes, a little bit of a kind of a tart cherry finish. It's real nice. It's kind of off dry, right where I like it. The other glass is this is a Riesling that I had added some orange blossom honey to. The Riesling had come in pretty acidy that year, I gathered, and the orange blossom honey plays really nice with it. Gives it a little bit of a tart finish along with a bit of sweetness. But now that it's been sitting for a little while, I'm also detecting a note of diacetyl, which is it's a bummer. But I think the idea behind this was good. I might just have let it get a little hot with the fermentation temps. So it is what it is.
All right. Sounds good. Is that it? That's all you're drinking tonight?
It. Only two.
Oh, okay. Ryan, what did you put in your cup tonight? You've been through that same thing that Jeff has, right? Unbottling or uncapping bottles that you don't remember what the hell was in them.
Yeah, same thing happened to me almost 2 years ago when we moved into the new meat house north, and I had these these cases that the cases were labeled, but the individual bottles weren't, and then the cases were half full, quarter full, third full, things like that, and they got condensed. So the cases got condensed down, and then condensed cases eventually got condensed with other condensed cases, and it became bottle roulette. You would just kind of grab something and not know what it was. That was kind of a fun game for a while. Some of the Meat House Nation guys would come over and we just bottle roulette. You pull what you get. When I was in college, JD and Jeff and Rachel for that matter, there was this. I was in a college town, and there were these little kind of dinky bars, and one of them had this back bar, and it was they called it the dollar mystery pull. So you figure like one of those plastic containers, like you get them at Target or Costco or something, and it's just a plastic storage container, and you just kind of snap. You can put like winter coats or throw pillows or whatever you got to store, in there, and they'd fill it up with all these like random, we'll call them value beers, and
beers,
and then they'd cut a hole in the top, it's just enough to get your hand in, right? So you couldn't see anything, but you get your hand in there, and it was the mystery pull for $1. So you're at the back bar and give them $1, and you just reach in and pull one out, and whatever you pulled out, that was the beer that you got for $1. So it was kind of like that. Only I hope Jeff's bottles are a little better than a value beer. Speaking of beer, cocktail hour. You know, JD, it was another rough day at the home office, and I said, you know, for my last conference call today, I'm gonna pop a beer, and so I did that, and then I kind of kept it going here, and I thought, well, you know, I should try something interesting to talk about tonight, and I had a sample pack. You know, the wife had a party, and I bought some sample packs of beer, and one of them was really interesting. It was a session IPA, so a low alcohol IPA, only like 4%. And I tried it, and I was really, really impressed with the body it had. I mean, to have a low alcohol IPA like that had enough body that, I mean, it was, put it this way, Gene, I knew the conference call I was going to be on, so I popped a 6.5% IPA. and so I did that, but this 4%, I mean, it had really great body, and it really stood up. And I don't know much about how it was made, just to say it was well done. I know that brewers have really, you know, folks on the low end of the spectrum lately, and done some really great things. So I started with that, and then now again, because we're not the beer house, we're the meat house. I opened up a mead. It is one of my session strength traditionals. So this is a orange blossom. It's an orange blossom traditional made with K1V 1116, and it is bone dry. You know, it's about 6.5%, 7%. I'd have to double check the stats on it, but it's about 6.5%, 7%, and it's carbonated, and it is just it's delicious. I mean, I love that's the way. Again, now I talked about the session strength beer. That's a great way that I like giving the session strength meads some body, especially when they're really, really dry, like 7% and like 0.99 gravity. Is by giving them a little fizz, and it's great. It pushes up the aroma. It just pushes that aroma right into your nose out of the glass. And it's bright. It's clean. It's got a little bit of that the fruit and the esters that come off of the yeast, and very, very nice. If I don't say so myself.
What would happen if you squeeze a little bit of lemon in there, or a little bit of lime juice? I wonder. You think I would take it up a notch, or?
Well, I mean, why stop there? Why not just splash with Grand Marnier?
There you go.
See what happens there.
I love it.
So, JD, when we were buying furniture for the Mead House North, Andrew and I went to this furniture store in town, and the saleswoman opened up a dresser and stood in the bottom of the dresser. And I said, well, and she's like, look, I'm standing right here and it's fine. I was like, okay, well, that's interesting. I mean, thanks, but my sweaters don't really weigh that much. And 4 kids later, you realize she was probably onto something, because kids think they do that. Well, the point was, this is all handmade craftsman stuff, and they said this dresser is warranty, and they had dressers and beds and everything else for 287 years.
Okay, so 7 years, 287 years.
287 years, and I said 287 years. That's okay. I'll bite. Tell me about that number. And she said, well, everything that we do, if you take care of wood furniture, taking care of wood furniture will last for 10 generations. And I said, all right.
Yeah.
And she said, a generation, and I don't know whose math this is, but a generation is 28.7 years. So that's, and I go, oh, interesting. So, okay, 10 years, or 10 generations, 28.7 years per generation. So 287 years.
Yeah.
So interesting. I mean, that I didn't buy it. I don't need something that's going to last that long. But it was nice. So, but bringing that back to our guest tonight, if I'm doing my rough math, and again, I don't know where this number came from, that means that she is now in a line of 143.5 years of or thereabouts of winemaking. So our guest tonight is Rachel Lippman. She is a fifth generation mead maker of Low Vineyards in Mount Airy, Maryland. Although meads and wines have been produced in Maryland for close to 40 years, her family has one of the longest tenures of mead production in the world, with the first family meaderies establishment in 1870.
There you go.
So
Wow.
1870, it's 152 years. It's just not all that far off from 143 and a half.
Yeah.
With a bachelor's of science in plant science and a bachelor's of arts in communication from the University of Maryland, College Park. She also studied in France, makes sense, interned at an organic vineyard in the Loire Valley. She also completed the Washington State University Enology certification program, and Rachel is currently managing most aspects of the operation, from production to tasting room and marketing. And I've got a feeling sample sending to JD after tonight. Welcome to the show, Rachel. And how are you? And what's in your glass tonight?
Yeah, well, I have to say, first of all, I love the organic 123 tequila.
Oh, yeah.
Someone in Maryland turned me on to it. He's like, this is the best tequila you've never heard of. And I was never really a huge fan of tequila. And so I had friends that were, and we finished a lot of bottles of those. So there's always one in each of our houses.
Oh yeah, this is a terrific find from a young lady who happens to be, she's the manager of the liquor department there at my local pavilions, and we just struck up a conversation one day when my wife and I were shopping, talking about different liquors, and she pointed this one out and said, "Have you tried that yet?" And I said, "No, I've never even heard of it." She says, "Well, probably because it's such a small little estate with a very small distribution." And I thought, wow, okay. And wow, was I surprised.
Yeah, it's incredibly smooth. It's I think the first taste I don't think most people say about this with tequila is I said, oh, this is delicious. So but it's true.
Well,
but
yeah. My wife says that. There's nothing wrong with that. It is delicious.
Yeah. I'm not drinking tequila tonight. I am drinking red wine. I'm drinking my Cabernet Franc, actually, because I had it open, and I usually have a few different bottles that I kind of rotate through. It just depends on what my mood is. So it's there's usually plenty to choose from.
Yeah.
So what is the Cabernet Franc mood?
So the Cabernet Franc, so we actually source a lot of our fruit from local growers in Maryland, and there's a fantastic vineyard about 35 minutes from where we are, and they actually work with two different clones of Cabernet Franc, clone 623 and clone 214. And clone 623, when it was fermenting last year, it just totally reminded me of the Loire Valley, where I worked, and it had this gaminess, and it just fermented beautiful notes of raspberry and strawberry slushies. For some reason, it just kept every time I dip my finger in the cap, it just was beautiful. And so it's a little bit more elegant of a clone. It has a kind of more leaner character. I mean, Cabernet Franc doesn't have thick skins, so it's actually 83% clone 623 and 17% clone 214. And clone 214 is kind of that workhorse. It's a pretty, kind of standard clone that people work with in terms of being reliable with pretty dark berry notes and a little bit of that kind of robust stoic kind of backbone. So
I
was
think
impulsive and threw that in.
I think he asked you what the Cabernet Franc mood was.
Oh, well, okay. Well, I guess, okay. I didn't hear the word mood.
That's
but
okay. I love the rundown.
Yeah. So that kind of maybe explains my mood, maybe. I don't know. Because there you go.
You love to talk about this stuff, right?
Yeah.
Sounds like,
yeah. My mom says, the more outlets I can speak, the less that she has to hear it. No, I'm kidding. But there are times where I feel like that she's glad I have the extra outlet.
Oh boy.
Well, excellent. So we tend, the way we typically run these interviews, I mean, some people have kind of the mentality of when they're doing a show or an interview, they kind of approach it like an architect builds a house. They've got very specific plans and how they structure it and where they like to go. Our show is a little bit more like just a guy walking around scattering seeds on the ground and just kind of watching what pops up. So with that being said, we're just going to scatter seeds and see what pops up, and that's where the conversation will take us. Is that pretty accurate for how we run these, JD?
Pretty much. I'm a seed tosser. Yeah.
I knew I kind of had I was able to kind of know what was, I could pick up what was getting thrown down a bit. So,
tell a lot of, I should say some vineyards, I wouldn't even say many, will do a mead, and many of them focus just on their wines, or especially if they're a grape vineyard. But you've made meads a part of your lineup, and it seems to be a rather stable part of your lineup. So tell us how meads found their way into the Low Vineyards production schedule.
Yeah, so my family history is pretty complicated when it comes to mead specifically. So we have an extremely long tenure of producing mead. Not just in Maryland, actually, it actually, my grandfather's family had a pretty extensive, I used to kind of consider it like an empire in terms of how I learned about it growing up in Poland, actually. So my grandfather is a Holocaust survivor, and he, I'm going to kind of go on a little tangent, because one of the things that I go through many rabbit holes when it comes to when it comes to researching about mead. I spent the past probably about 3 or 4 years really delving into the history, and it's been something that I feel like is not really shared or talked about very often.
Right.
My grandfather's family. My grandfather was from an area called Galicia in Lvov, Poland. When he was growing up, it was kind of, I guess, recently formed as Poland, because a lot of times, people from the area that he was from, they would also consider themselves Austrian, from the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And so my grandfather's grandfather, my great-great-grandfather and grandmother, actually, I found out recently, because another rabbit hole situation, had a meadery in Poland. My grandfather's father had about 10 brothers, and they were all involved in the mead business. So we had over 3 or 4, and I know that there was technically 4 at one period of time, because I found out recently that my great-great-grandmother was listed as a business owner of one of the meaderies that was in Burston, before they actually put the whole entire enterprise into Lvov. I found it was like in late 1800s. Her name was on one page and his name was on the other page. We actually have a copy of the old label, which actually was probably my great-great-grandmother's label, not my great-great-grandfather's label. And they made, Polish traditional, a whole vast variety of meads, actually, and since 1870. And they did it in the dessert sweeter style. And the reason why we know that is from the label. It actually, because the area region was called Galicia, which there's also Galicia, Spain. They did a play on it, and so it was a la Malaga. So that's in the sweet style. So I can actually send you guys a picture of or a copy of the label because we have a copy because my grandfather's uncle, so one of his father's brothers, actually had immigrated to Argentina before the war, and way later on when they found us or we found them, I don't remember which one. I think we might have found them, but that they had brought a copy of the label over with them. So my family has a pretty kind of complicated history in terms of it was like this sounded like a beautiful enterprise. I mean, there were mead dealers. Some of the brothers were mead dealers. Some of the brothers owned their own meaderies. My grandfather's family's meadery is in his father's. Like they lived on a flat. Behind the flat, like their meadery took up a whole block. And right across the street from my grandfather's flat was his uncle's meadery, and they were competitors. And they would get into like even family quarrels of like what quality, like their own like quality, like testing and what would be considered, good to show to the market. So they distributed like all throughout Europe. I mean, it was a very large production between all of them. So, unfortunately, my grandfather's father died when my grandfather was young. And so their meadery, like my grandfather's father's meadery, my great grandfather's meadery, it folded at before the war, the Second World War. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, most of the other ones and everything else, like my grandfather is one of the only survivors from his whole family. So they were all like lost due to that. Mm-hmm. And the one thing that I had almost went on a tangent and then backtracked was the fact that in pieces of history, I've found that there were documents, and even in the European Mead Makers Association, I've seen some PowerPoints where it says during, the early 1900s to the Second World War, mead making vanished, and they said, monks were the ones that were making mead. Right. And actually, it's not true. I mean, maybe a little bit, but like not entirely, because where my grandfather was from, I mean, there was this vast group of Jewish people and Jewish businesses of mead production, vodka, and beer. And they disappeared because of the fact that there was the Holocaust. So there's this really complicated story that my family has really kind of, I think what my grandparents did is when they started the winery, it was my grandfather's way of reconnecting to the roots and to his, as a tribute to his family. And it was really kind of more on a smaller scale, and it still is small scale. But when it comes to the future generations who are learning about this like incredible history and legacy that we have to continue, it became something that was a little bit more rooted. So mead was always a slightly, or not slightly, but my grandfather says like mead is our signature. And we've been making the same mead recipes essentially for the past 40 years, which doesn't seem that long in terms of like where our history goes back like 150 to 151 years. But 40 years for American mead is like pretty long.
That's
I don't know any other meaderies.
Isn't it? That's like ancient, isn't it?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and we, it's really interesting because I think my grandfather even has like this subconscious, he didn't really have the family recipes because he was so young when things were taken away. But he had this kind of notion of the sweet smell of barrels, the way that the honey was, the mead, the wort was it was fermenting in barrels, and it like haunted him. And so I have a lot of like memories from his sharing like his story of what the meaderies were like, how people made mead back then. I mean, it was really fantastical. And
we can learn a lot from our elders as long as we're paying attention, right?
Yeah, my grandfather's gonna be 96 in 2 weeks. I mean, he's fantastic.
Oh, wow. Wow, we should have got him on the show, too.
Yeah. Well, I know
Uh,
that they were drinking wine tonight, so they were drinking one of my Cab Franc blends, or our Cab Franc blends.
oh, yeah.
So they're longevity for you.
Wow.
You know, my family, my mother's family grew up all Italians up in called the Iron Range region of the country, and there's a lot of Italian immigrants there, and that's where Robert Mondavi actually grew up, and before he moved to California, and you know, I mean, we knew some of the family, didn't know his branch of the family, but knew part of the family, and he drank a glass of wine a day, and you know, until he expired. So yeah, I think there's something to that. You know, drink your glass of wine a day, and you know, live to be 100.
My cardiologist tells me the same thing.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I mean, resveratrol helps. I think also, you know, what really is important is, you know, having something, you know, to, like, for my grandparents, they have something that's really important that they see that has to continue. And you know, and my grandfather's, he's incredible. I mean, he was an electrical engineer, and so I bring all of my problem issue, you know, equipment, and he fixes it, and we'll do it together. So I've learned a lot from him. My grandmother's awesome too. So there's a really fun family connection that we all have with each other, and it's cool to be able to work with them every day.
Jeff, did you pick up what she just said?
Jeff's got his mic muted again.
Well, it's okay.
Go ahead, Jeff. You there?
I think I missed that, actually.
Jeff, she said her grandfather was an engineer. We've never heard of any meat making engineers, have we?
No.
Really?
No.
No, I'm saying that's the most common. Every time we interview a big home meat maker, it's the mindset. You know, when they can go in, you know, when they use their engineering mindset, and usually can produce
it's a very methodical way of working.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've had software engineers, we've had city engineers, we've had, I mean, you name it. I mean, strangely enough, nobody starts out as a brewer or anything like that, or no history in the family of brewing or anything. They're all like have these engineering jobs, and they just found this hobby and started making mead or started brewing beer. You know, so it's kind of a funny thing here at the Mead House. So we run into a lot of that. But anyway, go ahead, Ryan.
You know, Rachel, that's just it's wonderful to hear that story. I think that it's a way that we, you know, can connect with the past and connect the passion or hobby, or in your case, career, with you know, with that, with your family history, with heritage, and understand that's a very a lot of people do that, you know, with food, you know, at home, the way they cook or the way that they do that. So I love that. It draws more connections into our shared humanity, and that's amazing. So thank you for sharing that story. If I can be allowed to shift just a little bit, the mead that I see on the website and this is Low Vineyards, so LOEW Vineyards, plural, vineyards.com, LOEW Vineyards.com, is this apples and honey. And it says it's a crisp Sizer blend of local apples and honey, wildflower and clover, silver medal winner in the 2019 Maryland Governor's Cup. it's getting it. Well, depending on where in the country you are, it's either getting you that season or we're at the end of that season of apples. And sizers are usually on a lot of folks' mind as you know as fall comes around. Tell us about yours.
So we actually have two apples and honeys. And that kind of the way that the labels work were kind of by accident, but there are two, one dried and one semi-sweet. And really it's more on the semi-dry range, but we make our meads more like wines, not necessarily like ciders or sessions, or it's more like the alcohol content's like a table wine. And so the dry apples and honey, it actually is kind of funny because my mom loves New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. Like it has to be like citrusy and has to have a lot of brightness to it. And the dry one is entirely that. So she says we can't change it. That's her favorite one. And it's stainless steel, fermented, and really no aging. Our sizers tend to not have aging, and our piments do have barrel aging. In the future, I'm kind of toying with some ideas that I have to kind of bring up to my grandparents, and I think it's going to depend on the type of apples that we can find. So the dry apples and honey, the sizer has that's actually something that's interesting, is that we also blend our honeys. We don't really typically do just clover, just wildflower, and I kind of find that as a something that I feel like you usually see not non-blended meads in terms of the honey. We usually use a slightly higher percentage of wildflower to clover. And I think that just kind of gives it that slight floral, but like undertone. Mm-hmm. The apples in the dry sizer is, I think they're primarily Jonah Gold. And so it does have that kind of like bright appley kind of character. And then the semi-sweet sizer has this really fun like finish of a slight note of like vanilla. And it's essentially made the exact same way, except for, the acid's not as high. The residual sugar is, I think it's about 2.5%. So it does have that nice round mouth feel, and different batch. So the apples were a little bit different, but
how soon is it drinkable from fermenter to bottle?
We usually wait about 8 months to a year. Okay. Meads can kind of like ferment a little slow. It depends, because they don't have as much like yeast assimilated nitrogen in terms of like what grapes would have. So you have to be more careful with nutrients. But yeah, I mean, I think the dry sizer was like 7 or 8 months after, after it started fermenting, and then the semi-sweet one.
More of that apple flavor comes back.
Yeah, it might have been about the same. I mean, the thing is, like, we do all of our fermentations cold. So they're in they were in milk tanks, and now since we got a whole bunch of new tanks and renovated and remodeled our winery, they're in jacketed tanks. But I'm not making a sizer this year. Because we're doing some fun things with piments, but and I'm gonna maybe look into doing more traditional. So I made my first one last December, a Polish traditional.
Would you call my port mead a piment, Ryan? That's a piment, right? I mean, it's got 3 grape juices, Zinfandel, Syrah, and Cabernet.
But you
right?
said plum, it's black currant, though, right?
Yeah, plum and black currant. Also, and these were out of a can. They're
concentrated.
Concentrated, yeah. Alexander's is the name I was looking for. concentrated. Yeah, all of the juices are all concentrated, and I just put them all together in the fermenter. Added 13 pounds of honey, at not all at the same time. I had this was a really intense program, and I had to add the honey a little bit at a time because I needed to take it up over, at least get up to around 19%. That's kind of hard to do with some of these yeast with meat. So, but I guess you'd call it a piment, right? I mean, it's made with grape juice and a honey.
Well,
Well,
JD,
I
the
think if
good
you
part
add,
for
yeah.
you, I was gonna say, the good part for you is since you're not entering it in a competition,
Right.
or and you're not applying for any kind of label,
Right.
from the TTB or anything. So, it to me, you can kind of call it whatever you want.
Okay.
Some folks might say it's more of a melomel. Some folks say it's maybe you can call it a piment, but
Yeah.
when you make it and you're drinking it at your house, you can call it whatever you want.
Rachel, go ahead.
Yeah, I would say melomel, but I mean, I
Yeah.
think like you easily call it like your kitchen sink blend, you know. But it depends on what the higher percentage is. I'm assuming.
Well, it's mostly wine. It's mostly grape juice. There's three
and
cans
I,
to 2 cans. So
yeah.
but anyway, so go ahead.
Yeah, so Rachel, you've kind of teased us a little bit here that you're working on some piments,
Yeah.
and I'd love to hear you talk about those a little bit.
Yes, please.
Yeah, so the piments that we make, so the piments are more of what like that 40-year-old recipe is. My grandfather, when he was first starting, when he felt like he was kind of haunted by the smell of barrels and was starting to do some more home brewing when while he was had his main first career as electrical engineer. He kind of tinkered with a bunch of different recipes. Actually tried to recreate his family's recipe from his from what he remembered the flavor and the taste to be like. But he found that piments really gave the ultimate complexity and really what he was kind of looking for, not necessarily in terms of comparing to his families, but he was really happy with that. And so we've been making them like that since. We make meads in the hop method, and that is something that is a total practice that we've been doing for the 150 years. That hasn't changed. I've learned that we stir the honey even in the same method that his family stirred honey back in the day. But the piments are really special to us, and typically they're done with aromatic white varieties. There has been a couple of times we've done them with Cabernet Franc or Cabernet Sauvignon, especially if the harvest isn't necessarily the most ideal. I'm a huge proponent of the fact that, when you have mead, honey has no acid, and so slightly underripe, and that's like a very loose term. So in terms of like a Brix level, that's not, that might be 2 or 3 degrees lower than what you are really kind of looking for. That's kind of where I thrive, and that's where most of our awards of our meads have kind of, and our piments have really kind of shown through, because when you add the honey, it obviously lowers the titratable acidity, but by a significant amount, but you still have acid there. And even Polish traditionals, what they would do is put like lemon rind just to give it some citric acid. So, we have our own a way of adjusting the acidity with our own kind of blend. But our piments have been traditionally more with Vidal Blanc, some aromatic hybrids. This past, as in like a month ago, so not this past hours, like literally a month ago, we made a piment with Muscat Canelli, and it's really fun when you have a piment or a mead that you've been envisioning for me at least it was 8 months when I knew I was going to be able to work with Muscat Canelli from a local grower, and it turned out like exactly as I was kind of imagining it. I mean, obviously it has at least a year to age in barrel. So we, with all of our pine mints, they see about 11 months in barrel. All neutral barrel. We don't really personally love the end part of new oak, especially when you have honey. It binds to those characteristics of a toasted barrel really quite heavily, and it's not something that you can really kind of calm down because of of the sugars. So we tend to work more with neutral barrels, and that just gives it that really beautiful like micro-oxidation process. And we release them about a year after production, sometimes a little bit longer. Right now I have 2 quote unquote vintages of what we call honey and grape. They're just 2 pine mints. They're same grape, different vintage. I cherry picked the wildflower. It's always wildflower and clover honey from local producers. And we release them, I guess, about a year after production. But in our family, we don't typically drink them that young. We wait about 20 years until we drink them. And so I've started a program where I'm going to start holding back. We're going to start holding back a decent amount of our production of mead and then release them on a 5, 10, 15-year basis, because, I mean, they're incredible. And I sometimes feel guilty, that we get to enjoy them and people don't really understand what 20-year-old meads taste like. So part of this program, we do have, a decent stash of older vintages that, part of our wine club, essentially, that it'll kind of go on a lottery system of being able to purchase, we have meads that are over 25 years old. So
wow.
And they're
our resident scientist, Jeff, has spent some time over in Europe. Jeff, what was the deal about they made, how did that work? They made mead. Let's see, you're drinking your...
the saying goes, you make mead for your children, or you make mead for your grandchildren, or something like that. Yeah.
Well, it's the same thing as wine. I mean, honestly, you ask any European producer, and you ask them, well, what's the plan? And they say, well, this has to be there for my children. I mean, it's a European mindset entirely. And I used to travel, plenty to Europe I used to do distributing it with a nice portfolio from Italy and Austria, and I got to travel a lot and meet a lot of winemakers, and that was something that it resonated with me, because a lot of my life has been revolved around preserving our past and our family, and it's a kind of an interesting thing, because a lot of times these winemakers or mead makers, they do this for the future. My family has been a lot about talking about the past, and it's because the past, our future is guaranteed, but the past has to be remembered.
Oh yeah.
Especially father's story. So now we're in this kind of this focus where we're still learning things about my grandfather's story. I mean, he's really remarkable. It's just the one thing that we are now kind of pivoting to is also like having that balance of, we're all as a family talking about the future. And one of the things that, when we think about all the things that we love about our meads and our wines, the meads, I mean, it's just that there's just no comparison. I mean, I have yet to find, I mean, I'm biased obviously, but I've yet to find like a mead that really kind of gives you that.
To be.
Well, yeah, but it's like, when you have these like Trockenbeeren, if you know of Auslesas and Trockenbeeren Auslesas and Baron Auslesas, those aged ones that are like, 20 years old, it's that same exact thing with our meads. And you just don't see that. Like, people don't get to experience that. It's just really special.
One thing that one of my biggest regrets is not sitting down with my grandmother and documenting her stories. Now, I'm old enough. My grandmother was born in 1896. She came west in a covered wagon in 1904. And she could sit and talk about that whole trip. And I kicked myself in the butt as I grew older after she passed for not sitting down and recording some of her talks about that trip coming west from. She was born in Washington D.C. and. I mean, it's quite a trip. I mean, only wealthy people could afford vehicles or a train ticket to come all the way west. And so, the wagon train was still a viable mode of transportation for many, many people. And so, you're lucky, Rachel. Document this stuff, get it down on paper, record it, and preserve it. Absolutely.
Yeah, we do that, and you actually, my grandfather's testimony, about 4 hours of it is recorded, and you can actually digitize.
Oh,
you can listen to it if you go to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, ushmm.org, and type in William Lowe. You can actually listen to it. So it's publicly available, and it's it's a very unique story. I mean, every survivor's story is unique, and I'm very lucky to have him.
Well, Rachel, you've got quite a story to tell here, and I think we've only heard just a little piece of it. And we're kind of running along on time here, and we need to have you back. I don't think we're done with this yet, Ryan. I would certainly like to explore more of this with Rachel. Maybe in the next session. We run on a 6 and 2 schedule, Rachel. We do recordings for 6 weeks, and then we're off for 2 weeks. So we're on show number 5 right now. We've got one more to go, and then we're off for a 2-week break. And then we come back and do another show. So maybe during that next session, we can get you back, because we're not done with this yet. And I would really, I want to know more. Before we go, gosh, I'm so full of questions. I guess let's leave it at this. Okay. Is there anything that comes to mind that you would tell a home mead maker now? Any advice that you would give them based off of your experiences at all?
The one thing that I've noticed with trying a lot of meads and learning from my family history and our practices, the thing that is really unique that I think that people, I just kind of notice it. I am a huge believer of acidity, not too high acid, because I don't like really intense grapefruity notes personally.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's something that could be lacking is the balance of honey and acid. And then the other thing is I think mead makers and home mead makers should really feel pretty compelled to create their own blends of honey, work with, different parts of the season even. I mean, that's what I actually do, is I will get from an apiarist, like a whole bunch of buckets of wildflower with clover. And I only, from the wildflower buckets, we taste through all those buckets, and we blend based off of the ones that are, we think are like early season or late season or a mixture of both. And it makes a massive difference, especially if you carry through in the fermentation as a cold fermentation. So that's something that, blending honey and making sure that you have a decent amount of acidity is pretty important in carrying through fermentations.
This is Ryan. I don't know where you found Rachel, but this is like a pot of gold right here. I mean, you hit the gold mine right here. We definitely have to have Rachel back, because, like I said, we're definitely not done here yet. Last thoughts, Ryan?
Well, yeah, Rachel, I'll be in touch and try to get you back in the next. Like I said, So I'm doing the math here. It'd be like somewhere within the next 9 weeks would be the time frame we'd have you back on, and I'll work with you on that. The first thing I want to talk about, because we're so far over time, I'm not going to apologize to you, Rachel, because I don't think you mind that we're over time either from our conversation. So I'd love to have you back. We'll have you back. The first thing I'll want to talk about when you do come back is the hot method, as you called it, and your piements. So we'll think about that. JD and Jeff, I think the next time we talk to Rachel, I'd love to be sipping on a bottle of Low Vineyards finest.
Yes.
And so
Yeah.
and you can buy them, and I think our listeners would too. You can buy them right online at lowvineyards.com, and they do ship. So go out there. There's
States, yeah.
So
Go
if
ahead,
you were in the state, Rachel, please, tell people how they can take advantage.
Yeah, so we shipped about 37 states. California has some weird shipping right now, but I'm working on it with being able to, I think there's a requirement of having to purchase a case because it's through Vino Shipper. I'm working on the permitting so that's not going to be the case anymore. But you can order online. Like, people can come to the tasting room if they're listening from, the area that in the Maryland area. You can also purchase online to pick up at the tasting room, and we have really nice guided tastings. The one thing that I think that as if I were to recommend any of the meads that I have on my list right now, I mean, the thing is they're all great, obviously, but but I have actually 2 different vintages, quote unquote, because you can't put a vintage on mead. Of the 13 honey and grapes, there's a what we're calling the 35th year and the 36th year. That was my way of kind of working around that. So one was produced in 2019 and one was produced in 2020. They're the exact same grapes, exact same blending of honey, exact same proportions, all that good stuff, same aging requirement. And I released them on purpose to show that there is vintage variation within mead. Especially when you are producing it as a piment. So that's a really fun comparison. The colors are totally different. One was a later season honey, one was an earlier season honey. So again, that's something that I think is a super fun comparison if you're interested in something like that. And they kind of vary on, our meads tend to vary on the dry to semi-dry side. Mm-hmm. I was going to kind of play around with that a bit, but this year, but it didn't end up working out. But anyway, that would be something that, for people who want to really see the vintage variation, I would totally recommend that because it exists. And that's my goal with the TTB at some point.
Very good. Rachel Lippman from Low Vineyards. I'll tell you what a discussion we had tonight. Rachel, it was a lot of fun having you here at the Mead House. And like Ryan said, he'll be in touch. We want to get you back. This conversation is far from over. I love your family history. And thank you for sharing such a personal aspect of your family's history with us.
Thanks. And thanks.
We certainly appreciate it. So, Rachel, you'll be back.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, guys. That was Rachel Lippman from Low Vineyards out there in Maryland. And wow, what a conversation that was. Holy cow. Lots of family history.
It got me thinking about my family history, and not her story of her, Holocaust surviving, grandfather and that, but just when we read the 5th generation winemaker, so, and I kind of thought back. Is that so? Both my grandfathers, made wine. Mm-hmm. My mother's grandfather, came from, more of a heritage tradition where they made wine. There's family on that side that had come from Italy, very, big wine region. other family that had come from Croatia. Another big wine area. Katie, I think you know a Croatian
Yep.
winemaker down in Southern California.
Yeah, she lives right across the hall from me.
Yes, but I mean the other guy that you used to talk to too.
Oh yeah.
A couple big wine regions. I guess I'm telling you. Italy, big wine region. Croatia, big wine region. And on the other side, more of they'd been in the States for an extra 100 years, and it was more of just. If you don't want to distill bathtub gin, you make country wine.
That's
and
it's funny anyway. That story that she was telling about her relatives arguing back and forth who made the best mead reminds me. I've got a friend that I go out shooting with photography. He's Italian, 100%. Italian, and. He on his trip back to Italy several years ago with his family, he's got two uncles that live back there, and it's funny she was talking about that. That brought back the conversation that he was having with me about being at the dinner table, and these two uncles, arguing back and forth on who made the best wine. Because that's like a table staple. In Italy. I mean, even if you're 10 years old, you're drinking wine with dinner. I mean, that's just the way it is back there. Well, it's kind of funny, but I really enjoyed the personal quality that she attached to this whole discussion tonight.
Yeah, no. So I was just right. Of course, Rachel's fantastic. Just to put a bow around what I was saying there. It's, my parents' generation. So I said, both my mom's dad and my dad's dad both made wine at home. But, my mom didn't, my dad didn't. And I wonder, back beyond that, now like great grandparents and beyond, how many of them did? I mean, I could be I could be a multi-generation winemaker as well, but we didn't, these were home guys. It was part of, like I said, it was part of home economics, right? As the home economy was, you baked your own bread, you raised your own chickens, you made your own wine, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm sure part of that winemaking thing was just, hey, we've got this extra fruit. We can't eat it. We can't put it in pies. So we're going to make jams, or we're going to make wine, or we're going to make something so we can get some use out of it. Yeah. It's just a practical standpoint.
Yep, absolutely. All right. Gosh, I just feel like we could have talked the whole night with Rachel. I almost feel like calling her back and saying, hey, you want to do another half hour? Anyway, we'll save that one for the next time she comes on the show. Segment 2 here, guys. How much are you willing to spend on a batch of mead or a home brew? Again, my 2 port mead projects cost me in excess of $100 each. And Jeff, I mean, how far are you willing to go? Big question, isn't it?
It is, and this question comes up because I spend no small amount of time just kind of sifting through social media looking for questions to answer for our social club or things like that, and it occurs to me some days I'm scrolling through here. One post we've got a guy using really really pricey varietal honey and heritage blend apples of some variety or another. He's putting 20-30 pounds into making a 5-gallon batch. The next guy, literally one post down, is using Kirkland apple juice and big box store honey.
The
range is wide, and it got me thinking, is it worth it? Is the guy that's going and sourcing this 20 pounds of heritage apples, is he going to get better quality product? Maybe. Is it going to be worth it in the end? You know,
I mean, I can't. I really like these 2 port wine projects that I made. Now, granted, they don't. The reason why I call them port, like a port mead, is because they are made with grape juice. So is port. They're fortified with a brandy or a one was brandy, the other one was cognac, to give it that port like flavor. I mean, you got to understand how port is made to begin. And I don't really want to go into the whole procedure of it because it can get long and drawn out. But to try to mimic those flavors was kind of expensive. I mean, you're talking about the wine juice. You're talking about the 2 flavors, the plum and the currant. You're talking about buying cherries. You're talking about, I mean, the whole thing adds up. And I wasn't too far over $100 per batch. That's a lot of money to throw into a fermenter and hope for the best. You know what I mean? So,
and yeah, you can easily spend that much too if you're just, for example, buying a wine kit to make a piment. Whatever variety you want. Even the low end of those guys is easily $100. You could spend up to $200 just for the wine part of that, let alone the honey.
Yeah.
I mean, you can spend easily hundreds and hundreds of dollars on a batch without batting an eyelash if you've got the scratch for it.
Is there a limit, though, Ryan? Do you have a limit on what you're willing to spend for a batch of mead? Have we gotten to that place yet in our own home mead making?
All right, so I got some thoughts on this.
Okay.
and number one,
Jeff, you got a pillow?
Wow.
Go ahead. Go ahead. All right. Okay. None of that. Go ahead, Ryan. Come on.
I got a first aid kit for that burn, Ryan. Don't worry.
So when Jeff said, is somebody, with heritage apples going to make a better cider than somebody with Kirkland apple juice, and you kind of self-answered it and you said maybe. Jeff, you're more correct than most people know. And the reason is, it really depends on how developed of a mead maker you are. If you give somebody who's on their very first batch or second batch, single varietal, aged chestnut honey, and and a heritage fresh cold pressed apple cider, from some old Irish cider apple orchard, they're probably going to produce crap. It's they give them the best ingredients in the world, but how developed are you of a mead maker? So the first thing that I like to say is, however much money you're putting into your mead, take into account where you are as a mead maker. If you can make some pretty tasty meads, on your, let's say, I don't know, second, third, first, sure, why not? First, second, third, fourth, fifth, 10th batch, with the Kirkland stuff, as you develop, because you might as well learn on the cheap stuff. I mean, then you start thinking about upping the ingredients. You don't crap in, crap out, we've always talked about, but doing that. I mean, I really enjoy golfing, but I don't take somebody out who's on their very first round to Pebble Beach, or to an exclusive club where they're not going to enjoy it. They're not going to have a good time. They're going to hack around the course, and it makes more sense to bring them to the local pitch and putt and
Yeah.
and have them kind of learn a few things there before you develop to enjoy the higher quality courses. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing, and in case you're wondering, there's three things. The second thing, this is an example from the beer, from my beer brewing and braggot. A lot of times what I do is I find a beer that I like, and then I figure out how to make it into a braggot. Well, one of my favorite beers is, and you guys know I like the Belgians, I like the Trappist stuff, is Chimay. So I really like the Chimay beers. Now the Chimay Red is still in my mind the classic, and Total Wine, JD, you will buy a 4-pack of the Chimay Red and it's $20.
Yeah.
4-pack of beer is $20,
Yeah.
And the same thing if you're a hophead and you go find those juicy IPA 4-packs for $20 in the cooler as well. Well, here's the thing. I can brew a pretty darn good clone of Chimay. I mean, you can go to White Labs and basically they got the Chimay yeast right there for you.
Yeah.
And you can go get, you can make that yourself. Well, if you do the math on that, of 6 times 20, you're at what, $120 a case if you were to buy, a case worth of Chimay at the liquor store.
Yeah. Well,
I can probably make a Chimay clone for less than half of that. Let's say $60.
Yeah.
Well, some people probably less than that. And some people might say, "Oh my gosh, that's really expensive." I brew ambers, and they come out to $15 a case for me. Well, so $30 a case or more would be really expensive. Well, keep in mind what you're brewing. Are you brewing something that you're still, is super expensive to start with, or not? Now, if you bring that to meads, I know there's not a ton of comparisons because there's not like a Keystone Light of meads out there, that you can just go to the liquor store and buy a 30-pack for $8.
Yeah.
But there are some meads that are much more expensive than others. And if I'm trying to clone a Heart of Darkness, I would expect to spend a lot more than if I'm trying to clone I'm blanking on the name, but those session ones that came out of Oregon for a while. And you could go buy for $6.
Mm-hmm.
So, if I'm trying to clone a Heart of Darkness or am I trying to clone a session, there's going to be a very different price range involved. So it's all relative. Let's just put it that way. The second point, it's all relative. And then the third point is you brew what you like. Wasn't that you brew what you like?
Yeah.
And the thing is, this session, I'm now on the second bottle of it. But this session carbonated orange blossom honey. Well, let's break it down for a second. I put about 5 pounds of honey in. Okay, so 5 pounds of honey. I think I paid, let's just say $4 a pound. I'm just rounding here. I don't even remember what I paid, but let's say $4 a pound. Okay, $20. I paid $20 of honey.
Yeah.
I paid 89 cents for the sachet yeast. And a pinch of nutrient in there, and the bottle caps probably cost more than the yeast. Okay, so let's just call it, just on the ingredients, $22 in. Okay, I'm $22 in on this batch, and it was 5 gallons, so 2 cases on it. So I'm looking at $10 a case, or help me on the math on that one. What does that come down to? About 40 cents a bottle?
Yeah, I was
something
gonna say
like that?
a lot less than $1 a bottle. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm looking at making 40 cents a bottle here on a session strength carbonated orange blossom traditional that is hitting the spot right now. So it doesn't,
Well,
you
I
go from
think
there.
I think part of the expense too is getting there. Okay, because I spent a lot of money up front getting to the point where I'm fermenting what I like to ferment now. I'm brewing what I like to ferment. I mean, I'm brewing what I like to brew. I'm brewing what I like to drink. Okay, but it took some expense to get to that point. So, not talking about X amount of dollars per batch. Now we're talking about X amount of dollars over how many batches. Okay, after brewing a number of different kinds of meads, some of them failures. I mean, let's not talk about the pumpkin thing. We're kind of done with that. Let's not talk about the coffee thing. We're done with that. I was basically honey down a tube, so that's an expense. That's probably the biggest expense of all, obviously. But in order when I finally got to my version of the Ryan braggot that I enjoy and my ciders or sizers, I guess, it took X amount of dollars to get to that point. So I guess in a sense, Jeff, how much are you willing to spend on a batch of mead? I don't know that it's. I guess you could. Uh, I guess you could qualify it two ways on a single batch, or how much did it take for you to get to where you're at now?
And that's a deeper question by far.
Yeah, well, it is. I mean, that's a whole other. I mean, we don't even have. In fact, we're not even going to get to the social club tonight. Sorry, guys. We'll do that next week. But yeah, that discussion could go on and on and on. And talking about all the different batches that the amounts of honey and the different varietals and that kind of thing. But I mean, suffice to say, I think that for sake of this discussion, I think you can split it down into those two categories without going deep on the other. Okay, so at least that's my take. Your thoughts?
Well, as I've been thinking over this today after I suggested this topic, it really came down to, what am I trying to get out of this batch?
Mm-hmm.
Am I making something for a competition where I really want every last little ingredient to shine and really want to take home some medals here? Maybe I would spend out more. Yeah. Am I making this for myself, for a party, for friends, put on a keg and just have, or just for my own enjoyment?
Yeah.
The heritage apples I might not need. I think there's a lot of my growth as a mead maker, I feel like, has been finding that middle ground between, do I get the cheap stuff? Do I, pay for the expensive stuff? Well, there's finding quality that isn't breaking the bank. And for a lot of what I like, it tends to be in that middle ground where, we're not getting the cheapest apple juice we can find, but if Kirkland tastes good and makes a good product, hey, that Costco membership pays for itself after a little while.
Well, I guess the follow-up question to this too is, can you make a good tasting mead with lesser expensive ingredients? Is it possible? I mean, I keep talking about my sizer or cider, actually both, because I've made both, and I've got one single process, one single source for my juice, and one single yeast that I've consistently used over and over and over and over. And it happens to be Kirkland, Nottingham, and about 2.5 to 3 pounds of any pick a flavor of honey. It really doesn't matter. And that's it. And I've been able to mimic or come close to Magner's Irish cider. I mean, it's not the exact same thing, but it's damn close. It's a dry cider that tastes good, that has that appley flavor. It's got good contrast between sweet and tart, and it's dry. And you know, and then sweet. I'm not talking about sugar sweet. I'm talking about that sweetness you get out of an apple. Okay, like when you bite into an apple. All right, that right on the tip of the tongue stuff. So, you know, do you have to spend a lot of money on making a good mead? I don't think so.
Well, and I think in some ways, it circles back to what Ryan was talking about. How many matches do you have under your belt?
Yeah.
How experienced are you? And, once you get to that point, then sure, you can figure out, you can take basic stuff like Nottingham and Kirkland and 2 to 3 pounds of whatever honey you have at hand and say, okay, this is going to consistently make the kind of sizer that I want. Great. That's a good place to be at in your growth as a mead maker, from where I'm standing anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think it takes. I mean, you don't have to spend a lot of money. I guess it boils down to the particular project that you're working on, and I do agree with Ryan. I think it's a matter of where you stand as a mead maker based on what your experience level is. I mean, this port mead project, I would never turn a new mead maker loose on something like this because it's really intense. I mean, it's a daily, almost hourly exercise of checking hydrometers and, playing around with temperatures just to coax that yeast up just one more notch. Step feeding honeys along the way. It's unlike dumping, your 28 pounds of honey in the bottom of the fermenter, adding your water, and then put your stirring device on your drill. It's not that simple, so yeah, it does depend on your experience level, I think, quite a bit. And I think that'll, I don't know, Ryan, is that that's probably the single best or single most or single best point? I don't know what I'm trying to say here. I guess it kind of defines you, right? As far as a mead maker goes, is your experience level, right? I guess, and that's going to determine how good your mead is. When it comes to the bottom line, maybe that's the point I'm trying to make here.
Yeah, I would agree, and I would also say that longevity doesn't equal quality. So, I mean, the old saying of practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect.
Yeah.
And so, it's not, I've been making mead for 10 years. Okay, great. But how have you been doing? Because I can name some guys that we've talked to, Adam Bystrom, Nathan Siegman come to mind, who took the mead making scene by storm, by, only having like a year under their belt when they started, really, really doing some damage in competitions.
Yeah.
Just because they got it, they kind of had it. So, it's, again, yeah, you need some experience, but it's not this linear path for everybody of saying, it's in a year from now you'll be better. Well, maybe, if you do it right, or maybe a lot faster than that, or maybe a lot longer too.
Yeah.
So, it's just how you do it.
That's it. All right. Well, I think we're going to drop the hammer right there for the night. Wow, what a show. I apologize. We did not get to the social club, but I promise we will get to that next week. Remember, this is show number 5. Next week is show number 6, and then we'll be off for 2 weeks after that. So I don't know, Ryan. I don't know what you got lined up for a guest next week, but maybe we can make next week's show a social club show as well. I think we elected to do at least a couple of those per 6-week session. So with that, hey, we're going to hang it up. Thanks for hanging out with us, and a special thank you to Rachel Littman from Low Vineyards. We are not done with Rachel yet. We're going to work on getting her back, possibly in the next session when we get to it. I can't promise you a date, but we'll work out the details. Just an awesome conversation that we had with her, and we need to explore low vineyards a little bit more. So, but hey, if you want to get on the show, we've had a couple of listeners on so far, Kyle Ducharme and Laura Scott. It's real simple. All you got to do is let us know what you're brewing. Send us an email, info@themeadhouse.com, or just send a message on that Facebook deal or that Twitter thing, both at the Mead House, and we'll set up a date, talk to you about what your brewing projects are, and get you on the show. So that being said, I guess Ryan flipped the lights off. Jeff slammed the door shut. I'll go get the chickens. Hey, we'll be back next week for episode number 214 here at the Mead House. We're gone.